Hello, welcome back to the David Watson podcast. Today I spoke with Robert Monroe, and as often I do this too often on the podcast, I get to engage in just my curiosity of people, and Robert was incredibly engaging. And just in case I forget to mention it, he has a book called Bungalow Terrace, and we did, in a roundabout way, discuss a great deal about that book, but largely where it came from. And I hope you enjoyed the episode as much as I enjoyed talking to Robert. Hello, welcome to the David Watson podcast. How are you?
I'm very good. How are you doing?
I'm very good. And I've just enjoyed our little chat about the weather, and keeping with
Yes,
all
exactly.
traditions of Britain. I do like to chat to
Yes,
every guest about the weather, because
excellent,
to
excellent.
to be
Well, I'm
honest.
thrilled you're having such lovely weather in England.
Thank you. Because, like I said, being British, I can't help myself. I need to know what everyone else's weather is doing. So, um, so one of the things I wanted to ask you, because obviously we're going to talk about your book, Bungalow Terrace,
Yes,
is what influenced or what was the purpose of setting it in 1950 or the 50s?
right. Well, I really wanted to write a book that spanned a significant period of time,
Okay.
because I wanted it to be somewhat generational. And I was born in 1958, so I mean, the 1960s and 70s were particularly foundational periods of time for me, in terms of my own personal and emotional growth, as well as my taste in music and art and culture. So I wanted to write about something that I was familiar with. And I said it in show business because that's an arena that I knew as well, because I had worked as a casting director and a talent executive. Not that I didn't have to do a tremendous amount of research, because I did, but I wanted to set it in a time that was really familiar to me. And also, I went to school, particularly a Catholic school, during the 60s and 70s. So that time period is sort of entrenched in my sort of DNA.
Yeah.
And so that's why I wanted to set it in something like that.
It's interesting because my mum is from Southern Ireland, so I always refer to it as being raised as an Irish Catholic. And
Okay.
people are like, people will sometimes say, like, not understand the Irish bit. It's like, if you come from an Irish Catholic family, you'll understand the difference between Catholics. Because,
Right,
you
right,
know,
right.
that they were staunch, strict Catholics. And,
Yes.
even, they're the kind of generation that would accuse Jesus of sinning. They were that strict Catholics.
Yes.
And I would imagine if you went to Catholic schools in the 50s and 60s, it was pretty much the same, you know. It,
No, it was very much the same. And I mean, my mother came from a very old world Italian family.
yeah,
My
same.
grandparents actually emigrated. They spoke very little English, so she was raised in a very strict Roman Catholic
Yeah.
household. My father was not raised Catholic, but in order for him and my mother to get married, he had to convert.
Yep.
And there's no kind of Catholic like a converted Catholic.
No,
And
absolutely.
one of the things that you had and one of the things you had to do back then, in order to finish the process, was you had to sign a document
Yeah.
stating that you would raise your children Catholic,
Yep.
and part of that was sending them to a Catholic school.
I know.
So I went 12 years to a Catholic school,
So,
starting in the early 1960s, and I graduated in 1976.
so the reason I'm laughing, because this brings back so many memories, because people don't
Yeah,
understand that you were like you said, your father married a Roman Catholic, and so when I said Irish
yeah,
Catholic, obviously it's the Roman Catholic Church, and yeah,
mhm,
to do that, you sign a contract to say your children will be raised as Catholics. That there is,
yes,
and
yes,
you will convert to being a Catholic, or you cannot get married under the eyes of God. And
right,
if you try and
right.
explain that to somebody in 2024, you just they have no idea
Well,
or understanding of what that would be like.
right. Well, I mean, it's a very different time.
Oh, of course, yeah,
And people look at spirituality in a much different way. Back then, at least from my perspective, that was sort of the foundation of the family.
yeah,
You know, um, uh, not that it isn't today in some households, but I mean, there's a more expansive view, I think, today of religion, of spirituality, of thinking in a variety of different ways in terms of how you practice whatever it is you believe in.
Yeah.
But back then, I think it was a little more rigid in terms of there wasn't, outside of traditional denominational religions, there was really no other, particularly in the West. I don't know if there was a lot of, what do I say, a lot of choices.
No.
Other than that. And then with the counterculture in the late 60s, that started to change when people started looking at alternative religions and Eastern philosophies and more holistic ways of doing things, which I touch upon in the book as well. But when my parents got married, I think the rules were much more rigid.
Yeah, I mean, because I think when I kind of look at it back then, it was less philosophy and more institutional.
Yes, exactly. Yes, I believe that. Yes.
So you mentioned as well that growing up in the 60s, or you referenced the fact that era was an important part for your emotional kind of understanding as you were growing up.
Right.
You said it. I think you said it was. I've forgotten the term you used, but you referenced it was a big part of your emotional growth.
Right. Well, it was. I mean, it was a very significant time, particularly in the whole world, of course. But I mean, in America, it was a very significant time of change.
Yeah.
I mean, before that time, from my perspective, people lived in somewhat isolated cliques. They really didn't question the status quo.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden, the 60s emerged, and the beginning of the 60s were very similar to the late 50s. But as the mid 60s to the late 60s advanced, people did start questioning the status quo. Particularly the younger generation was questioning the status quo and trying to figure out, maybe there's a different way, a better way, a more expansive way to live. And this sort of counterculture started evolving. There was the sexual revolution. I mean, obviously the Vietnam War and the conflict arising around the war, particularly in terms of people who supported the war because it was something the government supported, and people who were like, well, we've never even declared war on this country. What are we doing there? So, I mean, that, and you would see that just on a daily basis, I mean, that was what was on the news. And then I had a lot of relatives who were a little bit older than I was. They were in their teens when I wasn't in my teens yet, particularly in the late 60s. And they introduced me to a plethora of all of this. I mean, the music and the culture and, alternative ways of thinking and doing things and, eating a different way and looking at the world in a significantly different way. And it was very exciting, and I obviously looked up to my cousins. And to my aunts and my uncles, and it really made a significant impact on me. It really, really did. And then moving into the 70s, I was dealing with other things in terms of my own sexuality, so that was sometimes a very complicated, difficult thing. But then, in the late 70s, mid to late 70s, there started to be a more liberating culture in and around people's sexuality. So yeah, I mean, it was very significant.
It is
for me
because it's very difficult. I'm 50 this year. I was born in 1974, and it's very difficult without sounding like an old bore to explain to people kind of what the 50s, 60s, 70s, and 80s was like, because people for the first time, if you think about the 50s and the 60s, for the first time would sit around a television. Anybody could do it. They became affordable for everybody. So we transitioned from radios to TV, but radios were still big, and kind of the whole, before that, moving pictures was cinema. So if you didn't see it in the cinema, you didn't see anything. And suddenly, people, you're starting to learn what is happening outside of your own town, and
exactly,
and that had never happened before. And then, like when when you look at the history of the radio stations in America and music,
Right.
for the first time in Britain, we're learning about American bands. America is learning
Right.
about British
Right.
bands, and you get this
Right.
cross-Atlantic or transatlantic kind of trade of cultures where one is copying
Right.
the other and being influenced by the other, and this had never happened in
Right.
history in the same way, and you had these things that were phenomenal in terms of how it exploded your imagination, like a simple aeroplane called Concorde. Wow, you can get across the
Right.
Atlantic instead of taking 6 weeks by boat. You can do it 4 hours by Concorde from London to New York. Do you know what I mean? And suddenly we all thought that, well, we never predicted this future, but the way that the imagination could go crazy, and
Right.
just from listening to a new piece of vinyl, a new record by some band that you'd heard on the radio, and suddenly you could own it and have your own record, or you went
Right.
to do you know what I mean, and trying to explain to people just what that was like as a child and a teenager. Every day could be incredibly exciting, but obviously the problem
Right.
with nostalgia is you forget about the boredom when there was nothing to do.
Right. Right. Well, no, I mean, it was very, very exciting. But then in terms of uh, the boredom, I mean, I think there was a bit more freedom in the sense that, as a kid, I would leave the house in the morning
Mm.
and I'd get home like right before dinner time. And like I said, I mean, nostalgically, it does seem like a safer time, a time that was a little bit more innocent. It seems that people indulge in the pleasantries of life a little bit more. But that's sort of the positive side of it. But then there's the negative side of that period as well, because it was also a period that was, I mean, acts of, racism, misogyny,
Yeah.
homophobia, injustice. I mean, they took place on a daily basis. They were unchallenged and unquestioned.
Yeah.
So I think there's a dichotomy in that, because on one hand we all sort of yearn for this time, a more innocent, simpler,
Yeah,
safer time.
I always describe it to people as being simpler, not easier. And
Yeah.
there's
Yes.
a
Yeah.
significant, to me,
Yeah.
there's a significant difference. It was a simpler time to live, but that didn't make it easier,
Right.
and it
Exactly.
had
And
a
I
lot.
think that,
So I was just going to say it had a lot of its own difficulties. Um,
yes. Yes. Exactly. Exactly. And I think that that's the dichotomy of it. Because I think we all applaud a more expansive way of thinking, a more accepting point of view. A world where uh, 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 people are embraced and accepted for who they are. But then we have the other side of it now. I mean, that sort of whole digital rat race that's going on.
mm.
So yeah, I mean, it's I guess every generation has its good side, positive and negatives. But yeah, when I think about the 60s and the 70s, I think about them with tremendous fondness. I really do.
You could. It's a very good place to. Um, I mean, like you say, leaning into your experiences. It's an amazing time to write a book, and there's a bit in the press release about you don't see books like this anymore. People, you know what I mean?
Well, when I was writing the book, when I first started reading and I sort of came to love books, the books that I loved to read, I loved books that were, as I said before, span generations, were a little bit more epic in scope, that were really rich in character, that not only told the what and the how, but the why.
Yeah,
You really understood why the characters were doing what they were doing. There was an emotional through line to their story. It just wasn't a device to get from point A to point B because it served the plot line. And these were the kind of books I fell in love with. I sort of immersed myself in them. And I was finding less and less of them on my bookstore shelves. And I think that has a lot to do with a variety of different things, some of them commercial, some of them financial, etc. Changes in the publishing industry, etc. But I wanted to write a book like the kind of book that I used to love when I first came to love books. And that's kind of one of the goals I set out to do, Then I had to decide what I wanted the book to be about, obviously, and thematically what I wanted to say. I had to find a voice, and I had to find a point of view, and I had to tell a story that I thought resonated with me and would also resonate with an audience. But yeah, I mean, I did want to write a book that isn't necessarily on the bookshelves today. And I could name, I mean, I loved Mary McCarthy's The Group. I love Eric Siegel's The Class. I loved Raintree County. Books like that. And I wasn't seeing a lot of those anymore.
It's interesting, isn't it? When we were talking a moment ago about how things used to be simpler, one of those things about like not easier but simpler is people had issues. There were things going on. There were stereotypes. There's ways you expected to act. So when people used to do characters for books, for plays, for films, they could be. You never really try to understand the character in the same way as today. They want an explanation, whereas back then it was, a man's got to be what a man's got to do what a man's got to do,
right?
And it was more you were almost leaned into it's not their fault, whereas today, he should have gone to therapy and worked on his shadow side.
Right, exactly. But at the same time, for me anyway, in writing the book, unless I knew where the characters were coming from emotionally, they didn't read authentic to me. So when I was writing the book, if I could emotionally connect to where the character was coming from, if I understood where the character was coming from, then it read more authentically, and I thought it would read more authentically to the audience. And in writing the book, I sort of realized halfway through that all of the characters are actually just different aspects of me.
Yeah,
this particular character is the impulsive part of me. This character is the the part of me that wants to control everything, that sort of thing. So I think, once again, the story resonated with me, not because it was familiar in terms of place and in terms of environment, but also because I recognized myself in the people and in the story.
So when you recognize yourself in the story, and you recognize, how did you prevent yourself, or maybe you didn't, maybe it encouraged you, but did you ever find a part of that you realize that's you and you're like, I don't really want to talk about that? Or did you lean into, do you know what, it's fictional, so I can really just lay it out on the page and maybe even deny it is me?
I think it was a question of both. If I ever found that I was afraid to write something, then I'm one of those people that say, okay, well, if this is bringing up a certain amount of fear, then you have to do it.
Yeah.
Sort of face your fear and sort of walk through it. So yeah, in a sense, there was some sort of, I guess, self-therapy going on, because I would have to ask myself, okay, if this situation was happening, what would this part of you actually do? In terms of acting out, in terms of behavior, in terms of how I would feel emotionally, in terms of how I would engage, react, act, respond. It was very eye-opening, and it was also very, very healing. It really, really was, because it made me face some things that, maybe I necessarily, not that I was in a place of denial about anything, because I certainly am not, but it made me look at certain things that maybe I hadn't reconciled.
Yeah.
And it was time for me to reconcile them.
It's interesting, because sometimes when you write a character, and I think it's always kind of very beneficial to yourself when you recognize that there's a part of that in character that maybe you're a bit embarrassed about, or guilty, or ashamed, or you wish you could be that character. Do you know, like there's this deep-seated alter ego that you want to kind of let rip and let out, but you don't.
Right.
But you can put it into a character and kind of live that life through that character. Or you sometimes can find something you didn't realize you may be ashamed of, and you suddenly think, oh, I don't like that. So you can put that into a character and kind of leave it on the page, and like you said, reconcile yourself with those feelings about it. And
absolutely, yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's kind of like acting in a sense.
Yeah.
I mean, a person in the real life may be afraid to go to certain emotional places, particularly extreme emotional places. But if you're in a play or you're in a film or television and you're acting a scene and that is required of the scene, then you give yourself permission to go somewhere that you may not necessarily go in your real life. So it may be something I might be uncomfortable to talk about to, the average person on the street in terms of, oh, I was ashamed of this, or these feelings are uncomfortable for me. But, it was not that it was easy, but it was more doable to sort of do it through a character that I was creating. That wasn't necessarily me, but on some level was me. Because as I said, I think they were all me on some level.
Because I personally think it's incredibly difficult to do when you realize that there's something that you don't want to really acknowledge, because it's either, like I said, it either hurts because you're reliving an experience, or you feel some sort of shame about it or embarrassed about it, or the other one is when you sometimes realize that there's somebody like there's this little boy inside you that wants to be a hero, but you don't really want to talk about the fact, oh, actually, I'd love to have been Iron Man in real life, or something like that.
Right.
No, because it happens, isn't it? You can get a little bit, like you can kind of acknowledge it on a playful way. Oh, it'd be great to do this if I had a superpower. But when you sit down and try and write out the deep character flaws and inspirations of that person, and you realize that you could actually be connecting to an inner part of you that desires this level of attention and fame as well. It can be really kind of like, you can almost clam up if you're not careful and not explore exactly what that would mean if you could do it.
Right. I think it just depends on how brave you want to be. I mean, when I was writing this book, I really made a committed choice to write these characters in an authentic, real way. I wanted them to be grounded in reality, and I wanted to be grounded in things that I already understood, that I already knew. I mean, there's one passage in the book where a character is deeply troubled about this sort of sense of lack that she lives with, this sort of poverty consciousness that she lives with. When I was writing that particular passage, as well as other passages, as I said before, unless I emotionally felt, like actually felt what this character was feeling in the moment, then I didn't think that it would be authentic. And so you have to tap into what it is that you have, your experience, your background, what you've gone through, in order to draw that self from yourself and put it on the page in order for it to resonate with an audience. Because if you're just writing it because, oh, that sounds interesting, or that's like, it'd be fun to like put on a cape and fly. That's great, and I think there's a place for all of that. But for me, I don't know what it's like to do that. I've never put on a cape and jumped off of a roof and flew. So for me, that was not something that I felt I personally could write about, because I didn't have a really deep contextual, emotional understanding of that experience. And I wanted all the characters to be, unless I could bring my own experience to it, and this includes all of the characters,
of course,
of various genders and ages. I just felt, for me, that was important, because I felt like I had something to say with this book, and I didn't want it to ring untrue or pat or cliche or uninspired.
No, I completely agree, because, like I said, I found the line that I saw, that because some of the sort of things that you discuss, like you say, drugs, the money, the loss of life, the sexuality, to look at these characters and be honest about seeing aspects of yourself is
right.
Do you know what I mean? It's unusual. Most people, they'll try to play it, but to actually put that up, it's like, no, these are all aspects of myself where I've experienced things, and actually, do you know what I mean? Through these characters, I'm going to put it down on paper and actually explore it, because people talk about it, but actually saying, no, this is my experience, that this is how I felt about it, and this is how, as a character, that aspect of my character would play it out.
Right. Well, I think, at least for me, whenever something presents itself, whenever I'm inspired to do something, whether, that be to take a photograph or write a book or whatever the case may be, if I'm inspired to do something, I always look at what is the bigger picture here. For me, it's never been like, oh, I mean, obviously I want to do something that is creatively satisfying, etc. But at the same time, I think there's always a more expansive viewpoint. There's a bigger reason why something is happening. So in writing the book, in terms of the book I wanted to write, the kind of book I wanted to write, what it is I wanted to say in the book, I realized that there was something bigger happening here.
Yeah.
And I could either meet the challenge or not meet the challenge. And for me, the bigger thing was to be completely exposed and honest about certain things and not hide behind devices or plot points in order to get my point across, but to really sort of expose what I truly felt about these things. So as I say, I mean, it was sort of a form of self-therapy. And so, I mean, writing the book was very healing for me.
Yeah.
And I realized that, that was probably part of the bigger picture of it. One of the reasons why I was inspired to do it. Because I always think if you're inspired to do something, I mean, truly inspired to do something, not just motivated by certain sort of physical motivations, but truly within your core, inspired to do something. I truly believe that there's always a more profound reason why you're doing it. And I think that, then you have the opportunity, okay, do I just write it for the physical reasons, or do I actually tap into what is the more profound aspect of this experience and lead from that place?
No, I agree completely, because that's kind of where I was coming from with the knowing that there's something on a much deeper level that you want to put out there and not hiding from it, because you do you know what I mean? Because you can, when you're creative and you're writing, you can embellish with plot lines and stuff like that, but you've actually the recognizing that there's aspects of your character in these characters. And like you saying, understanding that that there was something that had to be said, something that needed to be done. You're not hiding from things that traditionally somebody would hide from. You're actually opening up the door and saying, okay, well, let's have a go at this, and we'll have a crack and see where we go with it, and what will I learn, what will I discover. And the reason I admire that so much when people are writing books is because you leave it on the page for everybody to read. It's just like, this is everything I'm inspired by, everything I'm afraid of, and everything I think is crazy about me. I hope you enjoy it, because I've written it all down for you. And it's a really vulnerable place to write from.
Right. Exactly. And I also wanted to make sure that all of the characters were shades of gray. I wasn't interested in writing a book where there was a hero, there was a villain, that, there were these sort of stock characters. And I wanted to write a book where people actually cared about the people, even when they weren't doing particularly commendable things. I had one reader who actually wrote to me, and she said, I found myself rooting for badly behaved rock stars. And that really meant something to me, because what it meant was that she really cared about these people, that she had invested in them, and she actually saw that they were human, and I wanted to write characters that were human in all of their experience, because we're all human, and we all, we have good days and bad days. We have commendable behaviors. We also have behaviors that we should probably work on, that maybe are not so commendable. And I really wanted to write everybody in shades of gray. I don't think there's any black and white in the book. And that was really important for me, because that's the way that I look at the world. I mean, even when I hear something on the news, my first response is not to judge the individual or to judge the experience, but to sort of come from a place of like, what kind of pain was this individual going through, that this is what they chose to do, that this was the action they chose to take. And I try to be more compassionate in that way. I'm not always successful. I'm as judgmental probably as the next person, but at the same time, I wanted those kinds of characters to resonate in the book.
Because it's true, because I often find myself when I see, like you say, you see something on the news, or you see something happen, and we as a species love to take the moral high ground, and it's like, look, take a moment, and it's not sitting in their shoes, it's what were the shoes of their parents like, because they were the shoes, and that was the path that led them on the path they're on. Do you know what I mean? They had
Right.
their own. You have to go a little bit deeper than just why did they react to one scenario. You know,
Right. Exactly.
you know, there might be 20. You know, they could be 25 years old and have had 25 years of influence from parents who, you know,
Right.
like you were saying, you know, your heritage was Italian, mine is Irish. You know, so
Right.
there's things we were taught, things we were told about, histories we learned, and
Right.
whether we're consciously aware of it or not, these played out in our childhood, our teenage years, and our adult life, and eventually we kind of began to understand who we were and
Right.
where our place in all of that was, and
Right.
and these things influence our reactions. You know, as somebody that grew up with an Irish mother and an English father. My mum was from Southern Ireland. My dad was an English soldier at the times of the Troubles in Northern Ireland where they're blowing up England. And then I hear people
Right.
talk about the Irish and the English, and I'm like, I can't share that view because I'm both. I have an Irish passport and a British passport. So when people talk about
Right.
independence and hatred and all this, it didn't apply in my household. It didn't apply,
Right.
even though people are,
Right.
you know, blowing everyone up and people are shooting each other. My dad is in the British Army. Yeah, well, I couldn't take that side because it's not how my family was. We were
Right.
both
Well, I mean, that's
Irish.
also part of it.
Yeah,
Yeah. I mean, what's going on culturally at the time.
yeah, and like you say, these are these grey areas. You know,
Right.
everybody wants you to take a side. It's like, well, my side is in the middle. I don't agree with either side, and I don't disagree with
Right.
either side because I belong to both. You know?
Right. 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 Exactly. And I think that, at least for me, a lot of my own personal shame or, issues of, self-worth or self-loathing, etc. I mean, were significantly formulated by the time that I grew up
Yeah,
in, particularly in terms of my sexuality, in terms of the culture of the time, which is very different than it is today. In terms of being open-minded about a variety of different things. So, I mean, yeah, so, I mean, there's a lot of factors that will inform somebody's behavior.
yeah.
Now, at the same time, it doesn't mean you condone the behavior, but at least there's some sort of explanation as to, like, why somebody would choose to do what it is they chose to do.
Yeah, because like you're saying, growing up in the 60s and the 70s, it's very, very difficult to I was about to say come to terms with your sexuality, but that's not what I'm trying to articulate. It's the thing about when you know who you are,
Mm-hmm.
it's only from the root of that place that you can learn to love yourself. And it's only from that foundation you can have self-esteem. So when you can be truthfully look in the mirror and say, this is who I am.
Mm-hmm.
But because of everything going on in the background, because of your culture, because of that time, you can't be proud of it. That's a very difficult way to evolve into an adult.
Oh, it's very difficult. I mean, it's extremely difficult because, at that particular time, I mean, I try to explain it particularly to the younger generation. Imagine the most heinous thing that you could be accused of being today. And that's what it was like to be exposed as being gay back in the 60s and the 70s. And I mean, it literally could destroy your life.
Yeah.
Destroy your life, and to know that that is who you are organically. And yet at the same time, all the voices around you are telling you that there's something degenerate about it. And I use those words very purposely. There's something perverted, degenerate about it. Does a real number on your self-development because now you think that there's literally something characteristically wrong with you.
Because this is what I mean. Because there's a point. I was talking to somebody about this recently, and he said he discovered he was gay at 15. Ended up married with children, but discovered he was gay at 15. I can't remember what the history was with his father, other than it just wasn't happening. I mean, there was no way his dad was tolerating that. So it was it was a secret all his life, And the thing that whenever I have these conversations with people, you know who you are. That there's this is who I am. This is who I am, how I am. There is no other way I am anybody else. And
Right.
for anyone else, that's fine. You're okay with that. That's what you're supposed to be. This is where you're supposed to go. This is what you're supposed to do.
Right.
During that era that you're growing up and everything, when this happens, and like I was saying, it's that the things that the foundations of like growing up, how you discover who you are, where you are, and what you are, it's robbed from you because you can't be honest. And if you can't be honest and you know who you are, and someone, like you say, someone's calling you a degenerate, people are saying you should be hung, and you're like, but I don't wish, you know inside you're not horrible. You know deep inside, it's like, hang on, I'm a nice person. Even though you would hang me, I'd still take your bins out for you if you broke your leg tomorrow. I'd bring your groceries round for you. I don't hate you.
Right.
I don't understand why you hate me. But it's very hard to build any foundation of self-esteem and real love for yourself when you're just you're not actually allowed to.
Right. And really the only way to survive is to compartmentalize everything.
Yeah.
So you compartmentalize your life. You have your public persona, you have the person that you are with your family and your siblings and, you know, your friends at school. And then there's this other part of you that, you know, you have privately.
Yeah.
And on top of that, you know, who you are, you're keeping a secret. And secrets are dangerous.
Yeah, they are.
Because unless you shine a light on, you know, unless you shine a light on it, then it begins to fester and become malignant. So for me, my only recourse at some point in my life was to be like, you know something, I just have to like take responsibility for who I am, tell my truth, and let the chips fall where they may.
Yeah.
You know, and you know, because at some point you have to like stop living a lie. You have to stop pretending to be something that you're not. You know, and because all of that denying and repression, all of that stuff that I was doing in the 70s was very debilitating. And I realized I can't live like this any longer. You know, and I think with anything that you're keeping a secret, I mean, chances are the repercussions are not going to be as severe as you think they are. And I use this term because for me, that was the case. It leaves the ground fertile for something more beautiful to grow. And so, I mean, so that's why I think that, you know, people being true to themselves and sort of expressing who they really are, particularly to their loved ones, is really important. But, you know, you have to do it in your time, in your way, when you are ready. I did it when I was ready. I did it when I knew that I had the courage to do it. You know, 5 years before I didn't. Yeah. And I don't know how it would have went if I had tried then. So, you know, it's, but then again, I look at it like, you know, what is the opportunity here? I mean, this is, you know, this is the time I was born. This is the situation I was born into. This is who I am. So the opportunity in all of it, despite, you know, all of the heartache and the difficulty and the struggle and, you know, some of the self-loathing and the self-hate, etc., all of it was an opportunity for me to remember who it is I really am anyway. So I can't regret any of it.
No,
you know,
definitely not. Because one of the things about the book and the four characters is these are all things in their own way that they have to come to terms with. Because there's one thing, like that they start off, you know, as a small band, become ultra famous, and but they while this is happening and it's all blowing up, they don't know who they are, and there's all these expectations of who they're supposed to be, but all they've kind of had is this external explosion, but no, they haven't evolved themselves as people. They you know, they're trying to. I mean, I can't imagine for 1 second what I would have been like at 18 in a band, and then at 22 in a band. Like, oh, I'm on my second world tour. I was a dickhead when I was 18. I can't imagine fame and money would have made me a better person. And
and that's, you know, and that was the point of the book, in the sense to take these characters. That's why I wanted to start when they were children, because the book starts and they're actually in kindergarten. and it takes them through until I think they're in their, they would be in their 40s, early 50s at the end of the book. And the whole point of the book was to go through that arc with them from who they were when they didn't know who they were, or what they were doing, or how to negotiate the world, and sort of follow them into some sort of wholeness where they sort of rediscover the more sort of authentic, sacred parts of themselves. So it's kind of, so it's the story of the 4 individual lives and all of the things that they're dealing with and struggling with, as well as the story of this sort of superstar rock band. The band itself is kind of a character in the book.
Because that's the thing that's a problem, isn't it? Because when you're children, sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off then. But
no.
When you're children, you kind of grow up in this little group and you become a band. And you're going to marvel at all the potential possibilities and ideas. And you're going to be the one in a million that does it. But at some point when you're like for the rest of us, you kind of leave school, keep in touch with quite a few friends, and then by the time you're in your early to mid 20s, you realise you've got nothing in common with these people anymore, and you just naturally the friendship naturally dissolves. No big drama, no nothing. You just dissolved, and you kind of attach yourself to other people that you find you're more aligned with. But if you grow up in a band from like childhood, you're probably playing in the garage, and then you're on a little stage somewhere, and then it gets bigger and bigger. You're evolving, but you're not getting the opportunity to evolve with anybody else. So whilst you're in this nucleus, this kind of like this own little bio environment of its own thing, the band, you don't know anything outside of that world. And what you'll soon discover is that actually I don't like you, Kevin, you're a prick. Do you know what I mean? But for you and I, we just naturally dissolved those friendships, and there was no commercial interest in holding us together, and there was no because we're in a band, we have to do this because we actually don't know what else we are, because we started doing this when we were kids, and I'm in my 20s now, and everybody expects this. This is all I'm known about, and it goes back to that thing again. Like, I don't even know who I am, because I've never done anything different, and I'm now with this group of guys in a band, and we don't like each other anymore because we're not 10 and we're not 15, and it's not exciting anymore because we've done it all.
Right. Well, for this particular group, I mean, they certainly have their moments in the book where they are clashing and they're fighting and they have different philosophies and they're going in different directions, and they get married or they have various relationships, et cetera, and they're sort of dealing culturally with what's going on in the world at the time. They're experimenting with drugs. I mean, all of that stuff is happening, but the foundation that they built as children growing up, as these sort of 4 best friends, is always at the foundation of everything that is happening. So even at a moment when, somebody is clashing and they're having some, bitter argument with each other, it's kind of with the people in your life, more like maybe like siblings. I mean, you grow up with your siblings because I think they're more like brothers than friends. I love my 4 brothers to death. But, if we have an argument, even a particularly serious argument, I know foundationally it's not going to alter the relationship. We're still going to love each other. We're still going to be brothers. We just have to maybe sometimes agree to disagree. And that's kind of what this band is like. They're more like a band of brothers than friends, simply because after they meet in kindergarten, they're literally inseparable. And I think that is part of the attraction to the story, is that despite what happens in all of their lives, there's a myriad of things and tragedies and a variety of things that happen, ultimately, despite the conflict, there's, sometimes within the group, they're always there for each other. When push comes to shove, they can count on each other, even if they just hated each other the day before. And that was important for me to write those kinds of relationships. And I guess it's because those are the kinds of relationships that I have in my life. I mean, the closest people to me in my life today still are the people that, not in grammar school, but are the people that I met in college.
Yeah.
Those are still the closest people to me. And, and let's just say I'm of a certain generation, because we sort of built that foundation. And there are certain things within those relationships. I mean, I can think of one particular friend. We disagree tremendously on a variety of things, but that doesn't mean anything in terms of how I feel about this particular person and the fact that I will always be there for them. And I wanted to write that kind of story, as opposed to the story where the band gets together and then the band breaks up because of a variety of different reasons.
Yeah, it's true when you say that, because my three closest friends, one I went to school with from the age of 7, the other I've known since I was 15, and the other I've been friends with since I was 18, and we're all chalk and cheese. We couldn't be more different. In so we have so much in common, but they wouldn't even say to me today at any point during the week. They're not going to ask me, "Have you done any podcasts this week? Who have you spoken to?"
Right.
I doubt they've even listened to a single one, and I've done over 130 episodes now. Do you know what I mean? I don't think they could tell you even where to find it.
Right. But there are people that knew you when. There's no pretense.
No,
there's no expectation.
No.
I mean, they don't care what you do and what you're doing and how much money you're making and what kind of car you drive. I mean, it's none of that stuff. It's just they knew you when, So, I mean, like I say, there's a freedom in that. I mean, there's a sense, you may not see them or speak to them maybe for like 3 years, but the minute you get back together with them, it's as if no time had passed.
Yeah.
Because there's something foundational about the experience. And that's very comforting to have those kinds of relationships in your life.
Now that I'm much older and I can reflect on it differently, I realize how valuable they are to me. Not for any other reason than just that they have understood me through everything I've ever done, and they don't care about the achievements any more than they care about their failures. Do you know what I mean? It's just that I remember one of my friends, Stephen. He said a couple of years ago, and I just like the simplicity of it. He said, "I've no idea why we all hang out with each other." He said, "But we have for 20 years, so we must be doing something right."
Right. Exactly.
And
exactly. There's something.
It's just simplistic. It's his ability to just accept it and not question it. Whereas I would try and dissect it like I would a character. God, I wonder what makes that tick. And he's just like, we've been doing this like for him and me, like since we were 15. He's just like, I don't need to know anything else.
Right. And you've experienced, the things that you've experienced with each other since 15.
Yeah.
It's extraordinary. I mean, and that makes an impact on you. And that, as I said before, becomes part of your own DNA.
Definitely.
So that kind of there's something sacred. There's something sacred just period about relationships.
Yes.
But there's something very sacred about creating a long-term relationship or a relationship over a period of time that sort of defies circumstances. It's just always there. There's something very special about that.
There is. Yeah. It's one of the... It's definitely one of those things, like I said, because you can only do it on reflection. Like, you can only reflect on those college relationships and how close you guys still are. And it's with that hindsight, being able to look back, you understand just how the priceless value of it.
Right. Right. Exactly. And find a way to laugh at your differences instead of argue about them.
Yeah.
Or just agree to disagree.
Yeah.
And it's a good foundation for just, in terms of dealing with everybody and anybody. Well, if I can sort of agree to disagree with this particular friend, and then we can go pick apples together and, laugh about our differences, then why can't I do it with, this person that I met in the bank who's irritating me?
Yeah.
You can sort of bring it to any relationship, long-term or short-term. I just think that might be a better way to, at least for me, it's a better way to conduct myself. I try to do that more often than not, to be like, sort of bring that kind of understanding to every relationship. Because when it comes to certain things, no matter what you say, you're not going to change their mind. They're not going to change your mind. Sometimes we dig in, we're like filled with, resistance. Um,
Look,
so sometimes,
I experience this all the time.
yeah,
When I'm having conversations with people, it's and I try look, I'm as guilty as this as possible as anyone. I'm as guilty as anyone. But I can talk to people. You're the same, and there'll be one thing, and you'll be like, no, I don't. But you'll ignore the 99% of things you have in common that you agree with.
right,
We all agree with, in principle, we all agree that there should be some form of taxation. We also probably, in principle, all agree we don't want the government taxing us too much. We all agree there should be some form of investment for businesses, but we also all agree that businesses should provide some sort of workers' rights. And,
right,
we probably all agree there should be some form of prison system. We all agree there should be some form of immigration system. Now, there'll be margins where we disagree, but
right,
basic principles at their lowest foundation, we'll probably agree on everything 100%. It's just in the margins, the grey areas that we might disagree. And
right,
if you're not careful, before you find out, you and I could be having, respectfully, a conversation I've really enjoyed. But if you focus on
right.
that one area that you might disagree with, I'll suddenly have a terrible conversation with somebody I've just had a delightful 15 minutes talking to.
Right. Right, exactly. Well, I think sometimes, human nature is to focus on what's wrong in the experience
Yeah.
as opposed to what's right in the experience. I think we all, on some level, are looking to be offended in some way. I'm not really sure what that is about. I don't know if we're brought up that way, if it's cultural, if it's something that's more specific to this time than to a previous period. But yeah, I mean, we as humans sometimes tend to focus on what's wrong as opposed to what's right in a
Yeah.
situation. And that doesn't mean that you don't stand up for your beliefs, et cetera, et cetera. But at the same time, it's perfectly reasonable to just agree to disagree about something. You
Yeah.
know,
I
okay, I can and listen to somebody else's point of view. It may
yeah.
not change your mind, but at least it gives you a more expansive way of looking at something. Oh, I never looked at it that way. Let me think about that for a moment.
Yeah.
Um,
I think one
but
of the
we're all
things that,
attaching.
well, I think one of the things that's changed is that, and I think we just haven't had enough time with it yet. We're still trying to figure it out. Is you and I were
Yeah,
talking earlier that one of the great things about the 50s and the 60s was TVs in the room for the first time, right?
right,
And that was possibly the first time families discovered they didn't agree with each other on everything. Because up until then, you had
right,
nothing else coming into your house for you to disagree on. You might,
right,
you'd have no idea what somebody might have thought of something because it never came up in a conversation because it wasn't on the television.
right,
But we had
right,
decades of that before anything changed. And,
right,
things evolved very slowly. And once we realised generally as a culture and a group that some of these prejudices that we had towards people, whether it's because of faith, colour or sexuality, it's just like, that's not really a good way to work. We started doing something about it. Now,
right,
people in hindsight can look back and say, well, we could have been more proactive. You can in hindsight, but actually there was some monumental shifts, and it just took time for that to gently start rolling in the right direction. But once the momentum was built, nobody actually tried to stop it, if you know what I mean. People actually
right,
came on board with it, but it took a few decades for things to be out in the open where everyone agreed we can do better than this. And it turned out
right,
the more we all spoke to each other, the more we all agreed that no, it doesn't need to be this way. We can be better than that. And
right, exactly.
and I think, but one of the things that was also very current back then is when you told somebody, yeah, do you know what? I find that deeply offensive. Tough shit. I don't care. I'm not asking
Right,
you to agree with me. You can tell me you think I'm wrong, and that's the end of it.
right,
And I'll tell you I think I'm right. And at that point, you and I was expected to either shake hands and go and have a beer or a cup of tea, or to go and sit in
right,
opposite sides of the room. That's the end of it.
right,
You were just
right,
expected to respect each other's differences of opinion. That it was,
right,
again, simpler time doesn't mean it was easier. because you could be stewing on something and you might start to build up a hateful resentment, but that there was a kind of cultural idea that if you didn't like what I said and I didn't, that tough, you didn't have to, you could just turn the TV over, you were allowed to ignore me more than anything. And you were allowed to say,
Right.
I don't like David, I don't like his attitude, I don't like his opinions. And everyone, I'm then, as the person receiving that, was supposed to accept that I'm not your cup of tea, and you don't have to like me, and you and I can have a difference of opinion, and nobody else was supposed to get involved. And with the rise of the internet, where I can connect with somebody in Maine, and you and I can both have a grievance against the same person because we don't like what they're saying, it's developed a kind of tribal narcissism, where because we think
Right.
we all agree on the same thing, we're ignoring the fact that that one individual has every right to be a prick if they want to be. You don't have to
Right.
agree with them. And I think we've just lost that. We've lost that acceptance that, do you know what? People are allowed to dislike you. That's the bottom line, and that's the end of it. And we haven't, as again, because there's so much noise out there, just like if you look at it over a span of time, you're only really talking about 10 years.
Right.
But the internet started.
Right.
The internet started 25 years ago, but it's only because of social media that we got this problem. And now, it's like any storm. It takes a time for the storm to do its damage, and then for the storm to subside, so the repairs can be done. And I think we're just starting to see the storm start to subside, because pretty much everyone is just sick and tired of everybody hating each other because you like purple and I like red. It's like, well, that makes no sense.
Right. 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 I mean, I agree with. I think that people are beginning to realize that that's not necessarily the best way to be.
Yeah.
I think that with the advent of social media and the internet, I mean, I think it has created divisions of extreme.
Yes.
It's sometimes harder for people to just allow people to be who they are. My philosophy has always been, as long as you're not hurting somebody else, then you can be and believe whatever you choose to believe. But with the internet and social media, and I don't know if it's because we live in a society where so many people don't think that they have a voice, or they don't feel that they're heard, and this is the only way that they feel that they can be heard, and they do it with sort of a vehemence that maybe isn't necessarily necessary. I mean, I think there's a lot of variables as to why things evolve.
I would add,
and they do.
Yeah, I would add, I think a significant difference is today people think they have a right to be heard. Whereas
yeah.
Do you know what I mean? And what I mean by that is, just because you have a voice doesn't mean that I have to listen to it. And I think that's, like I was saying at the beginning, when we were talking a second ago, you could have a disagreement with people and people would expect you to just accept your disagreement and move to one side.
Right.
That's the end of it.
Right.
Whereas there seems to be this movement, and I think I have some understanding of it in a sense, that if somebody has an opinion of something, I'm expected to listen to it instead of just saying, well, I don't agree with it and I'm literally not interested in it. Do you know what I mean? Because there's a difference between my belief that everybody, the same as yourself, you've said something similar, everybody should be allowed to walk down the road without fear of prejudice of anything. You should just be allowed to be who you are, as long as it's consensual and you're not hurting anybody. Everybody should be free to do what they want. It doesn't mean your freedom to say what you want means I can't say I'm not interested. I literally have no interest in your cause and I don't particularly care about it. It doesn't mean I'm a horrible person. It just means I don't care about that because it's not important to me. And I think there's this element where there's a demand to be heard. And I think it's because, go back to the 60s, you could be in a town with 50,000 people and you might never meet somebody who has the same opinion of you. There was no way to connect outside of your social circles. Very unlikely. You go to college and meet people that you'd never met before, with ideas
Right.
you'd never heard of before, and see books you'd never read before. Whereas now I can get onto an online forum and have a great conversation with you in Maine.
Right.
And before you know it,
Right.
there could be 20 of us on the forum, and we start believing that echo chamber is how everybody should think. And
Right.
we're ignoring the other 8 billion people in the country who all think we're dickheads.
Right. Right. Well, I think partly, human nature is that, people want to feel validated. People want to be acknowledged. And I
Yeah.
think the ideology that, like, if you agree with me, or you say, yes, what you're saying is valid, then somehow acknowledges somebody. I think it comes from a place of self-worth. I've always been of the philosophy that, if you're looking to outside sources to validate you,
Yes.
if you're looking to outside sources to bolster your self-worth or your sense of self, period, then that's very minimal and it's not going to last very long. The only place you can find true validation is from within. That is the only place that you can find that sense of truth and that sense of authenticity. And that's the only place you're going to find any sense of true validation is from within. And we live in a society, unfortunately, that we look for validation outside of ourselves, and part of that is in our opinions or our point of views. A lot of people do it other ways. It's in what they do for a living, or the kind of car that they drive, or the kind of house that they have, or the neighborhood that they live in. I mean, people are always looking for things to validate them outside of themselves. And in the moment, it's lovely. Like, you could say to me, oh, I read your book and I loved it. Yes, I feel validated. That would make me feel great for like 10 minutes. And then whatever is going on with me, whatever self-doubt I'm having, whatever sense of unworthiness I'm feeling, is just going to reappear. And my understanding is that, I think that that's what a lot of people are looking for, particularly on the internet, is they're looking to be validated. They're looking to be acknowledged. They're looking for someone to say, you're worth something, you're worthy. Because there's a misunderstanding that can only come from within yourself. So I always say to people who are looking outside, I'm like, close your eyes and go inward, and you'll find what it is you're looking for. Be still, and it will come to you. Getting into a chat room, that's lovely if you want to do that, but it's not going to give you what it is you're looking for, because the next person in line is probably going to disagree with you, and then you get into some sort of ridiculous battle as you're typing on the internet. And I think that is part of the problem, is that we haven't been taught as a species how to heal ourselves. I think that we're taught to look, it's that old song, looking for love in all the wrong places. I think it's, I think we are victims of that.
Definitely. Because that's something I'm guessing that that's a significant part with the 4 characters. Because there's a point in there about the challenges that fame and fortune can bring people. And I often hear people talk about it, because I don't think, this is a terrible way to say it, but if you're just like myself, a normal person, you go to work, you do your thing, I think it can be very difficult to understand the challenges of people when it comes to fame and fortune, when it's kind of just chucked upon you.
Right. Well, I mean, it's very heightened. You're literally putting yourself out there for the world to literally judge. This is good, this is bad. And people will always have an opinion. Where the arts are concerned, everybody is going to have an opinion. So the only way to really survive that is to just hopefully try and get your ego out of the way and, just do what's in your own best interest. But unfortunately, particularly in show business, and I worked in that business for a long time, it's built somewhat foundationally on an aspect of fear. There's not enough to go around. There's not enough pieces of the pie. There's not a big enough audience. There's not enough parts. There's not enough money. It's sort of built on this ideology of lack. And so everybody is sort of scrambling, and that sort of fosters, with some people, a sense of insecurity. And if you're coming to every experience from a place of insecurity and fear, It's not necessarily going to bring out your best behavior. And then on top of that, you're exposed to the world to be judged. I mean, think about that. That's an extraordinarily courageous thing to do. You're somebody that wants to do something because you love doing that. Say you're an actor and you love being on the stage. But part of that, in order to be successful, is now you have to do talk shows, and now you have to sort of, you have to go and you have to like do all of this marketing and self-promotion, and people are human and foibles happen, and we're not as forgiving as we should be, and it's a complicated thing, and I wanted to bring all of that into play in the book.
Well, because that's funny you should say that, and this is me being very grand about my ideas, but I've always had this promise to myself that if I ever did somehow got some big celebrity on here, I would adamantly refuse to ask them any question that I just thought would just be clickbait. Because whenever I see be a writer, an actor, a musician or whatever, and they're just, I just want to know what makes them tick and what they're passionate about. I mean, I'm much more interested in how you like your coffee than why you got divorced. I don't care.
Right.
Do you know what I mean? And I don't. And this, and like I was saying, this is one of the things I think people don't understand. You can go through this really painful experience, and you've got that job as whatever it is, and you've now got to go out and promote it, and I can't imagine for 1 second what it's like to have to sit for 8 hours being interviewed every 15 minutes by a different journalist, repeating the same bollocks about a film that you were actually passionate about, and now you're just, it must be like pulling your eyeballs out because you have to repeat the same thing, and all everybody is trying to do is trip you up into saying something about your personal life.
Right, exactly. And it's very difficult. And the thing is with me, when I watch something, I want to hear about the work.
Yeah.
I was watching, I want to hear, like, if they're there to promote a particular film or a play or a book, I want to hear about that.
Yeah.
But the thing is that doesn't sell.
Well, because
to newspapers.
Well, because I'm talking to you now, and I'm conscious of the fact I've hardly mentioned Bungalow Terrace, because I'm just interested in what made you write it. What where do the conversations lead from that? What can we talk about?
Right. From my perspective, I'm looking at it as like we have talked about the book.
Yeah.
Just from a more sort of process place, in terms of what my process was and what I brought to the book. But the thing is, you just have to be open to what the conversation is. And that doesn't mean that, you can't lead it back to certain things. And that doesn't mean that you can't make certain points that you want to make. But at the same time, I think that we live in a society where culturally, particularly in the entertainment industry, that's what they're looking for. They're looking for something salacious.
Yeah.
They're looking for something that's going to create a headline. They're looking for ratings. They're looking for clicks, as you say. And that's not the most authentic way, in my opinion, to maybe conduct an interview or to get what it is you want. If you came from a different perspective, the person you're talking to might be willing to be more open about themselves, to be more honest, to be more vulnerable, because vulnerability is the most powerful place you can be. Yes. And they may be willing to do that, but their defenses are up because they see that you're trying to manipulate the conversation for your own purposes. So why not just have an honest conversation? And chances are you'll get what you want anyway.
I mean, like I said, I probably bias a little bit because I do a lot of therapy anyway as a full-time job. So I don't like seeing people. I work in an environment where people tell me everything about their life anyway, and I appreciate often how difficult it is for them to talk about that. And to put somebody on TV or to sit them in front of a microphone for 5 minutes and literally say, while you were making this film and you found out your wife had an affair or your husband had an affair, do you know what I mean? How did you feel when you found out the baby wasn't yours? Like, seriously? The guy's talking about how he's just got his best job on Broadway. Living his dream. Or this script writer has just discovered, something really traumatic about himself. or just lost a
Right.
child, and like, how did that feel? Well, it fucking sucked, to be honest. And this was
Right.
my one moment of escapism, to live in a thing that I dreamed of doing in my entire life, and now I'm going to live that
Right.
moment in just basically you opened up this gaping wound in front of everyone, and I'm
Right.
supposed to now be calm and civil with you about it, and give you an
Right.
answer that satisfies everything, when in fact I wish the world would swallow up, and I could die 10 times over, just kind of to hide some sort
Right.
of pain from humiliation or something. And I just think it's an
Right.
appalling
And
way to
without,
treat
and
people.
without consent.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
I mean, and without consent.
yeah,
I
exactly
mean,
that.
you're asking a question that you're not there to talk about.
Yeah,
I mean, it'd be very different if in the pre-interview they would like, oh yes, we would like to talk about your divorce,
mm,
and somebody consented to that. But if they were just like, oh, you're here to talk about your, new play,
yeah,
and then they throw this at you, it disarms people,
mm,
um, and it's not really that consensual because they hadn't agreed to talk about it in the first place.
no.
I mean, you have to respect people's boundaries. I mean, in my opinion, I think that we have to respect people's boundaries.
I think as well. I think first and foremost, there's a point where they're just not looking at someone and saying, "Do you know what? That's a person. Do you know what I mean? That's somebody's husband, somebody's wife, somebody's boyfriend, somebody's mother, somebody's father, somebody's sister. Do you know what I mean? They're a human being, and you've probably had traumatic breakups. I've had traumatic breakups, and when there's things have gone really bad in your life, and when that happens, unfortunately, the world doesn't stop, and you do have to carry on and function. And thankfully, I'm not somebody that the entire world wants to hear. I wish I was, to be fair, but that's the point of having a podcast. But in the moment that you are going through that, where you feel so vulnerable and so hurt, but you have to, because it's your job to sit in front of the press, and then people just bombard you with those questions instead of thinking, Jesus Christ, I bet there was just the last place on earth you want to be right now. How can I make this better? Make this just easier for you, instead of oh, I wonder if I can make this pain and vulnerability 100 times worse.
Right. Well, I think on some level it's because they're looking at them as a commodity, not as a person.
Yeah.
And and from their perspective, and I don't know what this is in society, but this this impulse to bring people down to size, or to dismantle the pedestal your heroes are on. I'm not really sure what that's about, but from their perspective, oh look, you're famous, you have everything, you're wealthy, you have everything that the physical world dictates is successful. And I don't know, maybe they think they're humanizing them by doing that, or making them more relatable because, people at home are going through the same thing. I mean, I don't really know. I'm not really sure about that.
I find it almost nauseous when there's just a complete disregard for somebody's humanity in that way, for nothing other than entertainment. Do you know what I mean? And it's the worst kind of entertainment, because and not just because they've been asked the question, but because there's an expectation that they're supposed to behave and be respectful back to you when they answer it. Do you know what I mean? And when you see somebody who's clearly in that much pain because of something going on in their personal life, and you can't just give them an ounce of humanity for the 5 minutes that they're there in front of you, I just find that appalling, completely appalling as a human being.
Well, exactly. I think in any conversation, you always have to bring the humanity to it. You always have to look at somebody else there, but for the grace of God, to use an old phrase. And also, try and be, try and be as compassionate as you can be. You can't just look at somebody as a commodity or a stepping stone to something better. I guess you can look at it that way, but ultimately, I mean, I'm a firm believer in energy. The energy that you put out is the energy that's going to come back to you. I mean, that's just physics. So, so in the moment, it may serve a particular purpose, but in the long run, it's not going to serve you, because whatever that was, is just going to come back to you. And, so I think if you can always remember that, everything is energy,
Yeah.
and everything is an exchange of energy, and the energy that goes out comes back. It's cyclical. At least for me, I'm like, okay, like even if I get annoyed, I'm like standing in the grocery store line, I'm getting annoyed. I will say to myself, I'm like, Bob, whatever this is you're putting out here, whatever this impatience is, this energy that it's just going to come, it's just going to recreate more, it's going to recreate more experiences in your life where you're going to feel impatient. So why don't you just calm down and like look at a magazine?
I
How
needed to hear that, because I've had some stupid dialogue going on in my head for the last few days, and I keep correcting myself saying, is this good behavior or bad behavior? You're like, yeah, it's bad behavior, but you're right, there's just this stupid impatience going on in my head at the moment, and I just like, you've got to get a grip of this, because exactly, it's going to come back and haunt me.
Well, it's not even haunting. I mean, it's necessarily the way that you, I mean, I always say the universe doesn't necessarily reward you for your suffering. The universe only reflects back to you what it is you're already feeling.
Yeah.
So if you're feeling all of this impatience and you're projecting it outward, you're just going to get more experiences that are going to bring you and make you impatient. And if you say that with any emotion, whether it's anger or frustration, jealousy, etc., you're only going to recreate it over and over again, because everything is changing, but it's just changing back to the same thing because you're choosing not to change.
Yeah.
So so if you can sort of be conscious of that, which I try to, particularly even in the most mundane circumstances, like, I can't find a parking space.
Yeah.
I'm like, Bob, if you just stop being frustrated by this, then chances are the parking space will in and of itself just materialize. But all of your frustration is just bringing more frustration because you can't find the parking space. So let it go.
It's so true. It's so true.
You could do that in like any experience.
Just lastly, because I'm conscious of time,
Okay.
this is a random question that's not related to anything
Okay.
we've discussed. I just like to put it out there as the last question. Being playful and using your imagination.
Okay.
Imagine you could go back to any place and anywhere in time. Where would you go? Why would you go there? What car would you drive, and what music would you listen to?
Oh. Okay, and this is going to seem weird.
No.
This is what came. I would go back to October 12th, 1971. I would be in the opening night audience of the original production of Jesus Christ Superstar.
Oh, I like that.
I would be driven in one of those big old, because it was in New York, of course, at the time, the taxi cabs that don't exist anymore, the big checkered cabs where you could put 6 people in the back seat. I used to love riding in those. And then I guess I'd be listening to the score because I was about to see the play.
Robert, that is fantastic. Thank you so much. I really have enjoyed the conversation. Thank you.
I've enjoyed it very much myself. Thank you so much, David.
And that was Robert. And like I said, it was a very engaging episode. And I do, as I mentioned, sometimes worry with guests that I go off too much on a tangent and forget why they're actually talking to me. And Robert was incredibly generous with his time. And yeah, I very insightful conversation. Very insightful. Please do check out his book, Bungalow Terrace. And as always, thank you very much for your support, for watching, for listening. And wherever you are, whatever you believe, please do take care and be blessed. Thank you.